সত্যি বলতে কি জয়দির সাথে আমার ঘনিষ্ঠ পরিচয় স্বল্পকালের। প্রথম থেকে আমি ওনাকে দেখেছি প্রদ্যোৎদা যখন আসতেন ওনার সাথে দলে আসতেন, কিন্তু ঘনিষ্ঠতা শুরু হয় বিশেষ করে যখন দমনদা দেহ রক্ষার পর এরা সাজেস্ট করলো যে আমি চেয়ারম্যান হই ফাউন্ডেশন স্কুল। যদি তখন আমি একটু আপত্তি করেছিলাম যে আমি পন্ডিচেরি ছেড়ে কোনোদিন বাইরে এতকাল যাইনি, যাব না। সেই শর্তটা ওরা মেনে নিয়েছে। তারপরে এমনি জয়দির সাথে আমার যে পরিচয় এই পর্যায়ে এসে দাঁড়ায় সত্যিকারের ভাই বোনের মতো। আর আমাকে যেটা ইমপ্রেস করেছে সেটা জয়দিকে প্রথম থেকেই দেখে যেটা মনে হয়েছে যে শি ওয়াজ এ ভেরি ডাইনামিক পার্সোনালিটি, মিষ্টি স্বভাব কিন্তু কাজ আদায় করতে জানে। ওনার কাজের বিষয়ে আমি খুব একটা বলতে পারবো না, সেটা যারা কর্মক্ষেত্রে ওনার পরিচয় পেয়েছে তারাই ভালোভাবে বলতে পারে। কিন্তু আমাকে যেটা সবচেয়ে বেশি ইমপ্রেস করেছে সেটা হলো জয়দির শেষ কয়েকটা দিন, যখন উনি জানতে পারলেন যে উনি ক্যান্সার রোগী, দিন ঘনিয়ে আসছে, কিন্তু ওনার মুখ দেখে এতটুকু বোঝা যায়নি যে আসন্ন মৃত্যু নিকট। এই যে ভেতরের একটা পয়েস, এটা আমার মনে হয় সম্ভব একমাত্র যদি না ভেতরে আত্মার সাথে একটা যোগাযোগ হয়। সেই হিসেবে আমার মনে হয়েছে যিনি একটা সত্যিকারের বড় সাধিকা, মার মহান কর্মী। আর সেটাতেই ওনার জন্য আমার শুধু ভালোবাসা না, আমার শ্রদ্ধা।
I knew Joya Mittal for several decades, mainly because of our common interest in Sri Aurobindo. When I used to visit Calcutta, she was usually there at my talks. And then I was interested to learn that she's running an Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture. And so the next year when I went there, she took me to that institute. And I was very impressed, not only by the institute, but by her dedication and her devotion to Sri Aurobindo and the way she was running that institution. I went around the institution. In fact, I think I inaugurated.
My sweet mother, it is 22nd July 1999. My final journey has begun. I have completed the last task you had assigned me. I handed over a check for 10,000 rupees that the students of the school had collected for the Kargil Fund to General Shankar Rai Chaudhary. I thought he was a little surprised to see that I was so unwell. After the last few months of constant struggle with death, sweet mother, I am on my way to the hospital from your home of grace. I love all those who belong to Lakshmi's house, knowing that they love their beloved Joyadi. They have been trying so hard to alleviate my suffering. I suffer less than them, for pain is in their hearts. The day my ailment was first diagnosed, they broke down because they could never believe that such a terminal illness could ever afflict me. Acute myeloid leukemia is such a terrifying name. But, sweet mother, I am, after all, your daughter. It was the last test of my faith, my endurance. As the disease spread within me, I knew I was being drawn closer to you. Your expression became sweeter than ever before. I smiled as I worked for the ashram with renewed vigor. I worked in haste. There was so much to conclude. Today I am content and tranquil, at once united with you, yet liberated, fulfilled. I have made your house ready for the role that Sri Aurobindo and you have assigned to it. The grace of the divine is pouring down here in an uninterrupted flow, coupled with your compassion. I have often wondered how you made me do so much, and I could never fathom how Daddy had transferred so much responsibility on my shoulders. What was it that moved me, a very ordinary woman, to become your instrument? When and where did it all begin? I can see my whole life as in a mirror in Lakshmi's house, but should I look back into the past? I was born on 2nd February 1936 at Bhabanipur. Spring had arrived and Calcutta was beautiful and radiant like it always is on the eve of Saraswati Pujo. My cousin Joya and I were born within a day of each other in this city of joy. When the news of my birth came, my brother Olu, or Dada Bhai, as I learned to call him, rushed to see me from our Shampupur home, accompanied by my father. My childhood days spent at 32 Shampupur Street now seem like a small moment in time. Ours was a conservative Hindu joint family that lived on the street, blessed by the footsteps of Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna Paramahansa. In fact, Swami Vivekananda had met Sri Ramakrishna for the first time at our ancestral family home on Shimle Street. Our entire life was centered around the presiding household deity, Annapurna. Many saints and savants had frequented our house, like Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramdas Kathia Baba, Sri Hangshadev Avadhut, and Tarukesh Babu. The air was full of incense and the melody of our daily prayers. Guests and visitors were fed daily according to the strictest Hindu norms. The Bhoirobi played on the Shanai would wake us up every morning. Devotion and ritual were in our bloodstream. I recall the music of celebrated musicians and singers who came from near and far to perform here. In one corner of the ground floor was the Bawarchi Khana, a kitchen that served delicious Mughlai cuisine to friends and visitors. At Christmas, the house was full of the aroma of baking cakes. There were many more servants than members in our Shampukur household. As the youngest member of this sprawling family, I was enveloped by their love and affection and earned the sobriquet of Joya Rani. I soon learned to live with others and share my joys with them. My education began at home, and I learned to read and write from my tutors at home. From my father, I learned Bengali and maths. Kantida, my brother's friend, taught me English. I was 7 years old when I first went to school in 1943. I was enrolled in class 2 in Duff School, which was very close by. I am still very close to my schoolmates, Shobita, Aloka, Arati, Krishna, and Shulekha, daughter of Birendra Krishna Bhadra. I waited at our doorstep for Shobita, with whom I walked to school every day, chaperoned by their cook Ramnath, down Shampoo Street. Though we had no school uniform, I always loved to dress up, and my frocks came from the master tailors of Mitra Bruj. I was always one of the better students in my class. After school, we friends would walk through lanes and by lanes on our way back home. Shulekha's house came first, then Aloka would turn towards Kumble Tola, and after I reached home, Shobita would walk the rest of the way home with Ramnath in tow. Since Duff School only had a primary section, my schooling thereafter would have to continue at home. By then, I was learning to play the sitar, israj, piano, and guitar, and dance as well. My friends moved to many schools, like Bethune, St. Margaret's, and Brahmo Girls. I had once adorned the entire courtyard with alpona. Decorative arts and crafts always appealed to me, from decorating the customary trousseau at weddings to dressing up dolls to painting. I learned to take responsibility fairly early on. When Dada Bhai travelled to England to train as an electrical engineer. My mother fell ill soon thereafter. She had cancer. I had to look after my father and my mother when she returned home from hospital. Dadabhai came back a few years later and Muriel joined him from England. A lady of exquisite grace and extremely resolute, she travelled halfway across the world to marry him. I appeared for your work. While I was still in Bethune, Mama Babu took me on my first trip outside Calcutta and away from my parents. Co-passengers suggested that we must visit Pondicherry, although that was not scheduled, and we listened to them. I felt I had seen the streets of Pondicherry before. I had read about Sri Aurobindo's passing away in Amrita Bajar Putrika and had been thrilled with how he lay immortal for several days at a stretch. The most important phase of his life had begun just a few steps away from my home at the turn of Shampukur Lane. It was here that he heard the divine command, "Go to Chandannagor." That was to be soon followed by his voyage to Pondicherry. My neighborhood in Shampukur and the Pondicherry ashram merged instantly in my consciousness. I realized that your life of service could be mine too. I learned that you were the universal mother, my sweet mother. Having seen you once, I was restless to see you again. Around 11 in the morning, I saw you briefly on the balcony. I followed you around all afternoon like a puppy at the tennis ground and at the playground. Taking nuts from your hand was a phenomenal experience. Your burning eyes, like coals on fire, penetrated the depths of my soul. I only heard you saying au revoir, though I didn't know what the words meant. The night passed in a wondrous ecstasy. I learned that Thursday was a day of blessing, so I could not come away without being blessed by the Mother of the Worlds. It seemed to me that life without you was meaningless. I waited in the queue, and you gave me a white frangipani, or psychological perfection, according to you. And I learned that the 5 petals had definite meanings, namely aspiration, faith, sincerity, devotion, and surrender. I saw a strange light on your smiling face. I had tried to avoid your gaze, yet you bent down to meet my eyes, wrenching something out from deep within. The return from Pondicherry rent my heart. It seemed as though I had torn away my body, while the rest of me was left behind at your feet. I had heard of heaven as a child, but this was the first time in my life that I saw, knew, and experienced it. In my heart, I did not wish to return, but Mama Babu's insistence forced me. But I was not the same person. I would stand on my rooftop and think of a strange loneliness captured me, but I did not reveal it to anyone. The rooftop became my ashram of liberation. I sang so many of Tagore's songs, sitting all alone up there. The happy memories of days and nights spent with my family here on the rooftop changed life dramatically for me. Meanwhile, my parents were arranging a match for me. He turned out to be an engineer who had been trained in England. Her Majesty's sponsorship had enabled Rothin to learn about open-cast mining in Newcastle. He had returned and was working for the Damodar Valley Corporation. Mama Babu was sent to find out more about my future home. My family hoped that I would be loved and treasured there as much as I was in my own home, more so perhaps because my prospective husband had lost his mother at a young age. On 5th August 1954, I was married. From Shampukur, I came to my new home in Shambazar. From Joya Ghosh, I became Joya Mitra. I had entered into another world. The memories of those days flash by in a jiffy. My workaholic husband was back in Maithon building a dam. An enterprising and brilliant engineer, he had little time or interest outside his sphere of work. I had to look after his father and continued to live in Calcutta. Unobtrusively, unnoticeably, and often from a distance, though he continued to support me throughout my life. With my husband absent, my brother-in-law, whom I called Thakurpo, became my friend and confidant. I was very fond too of Thakurji, or my sister-in-law's 2-year-old son, Bubai, who stayed over often enough. Thakurpo got married, and his children, Kakuli and Joy, and Thakurji's daughter, Tukai, came along in course of time. I loved them all. And there was Gaur, the young servant, who was more like a brother-in-law. From my new home, I completed my intermediate from Bethune College and enrolled at City College for a BA degree. I even went to Gitobitan for singing classes. In those days, Gitobitan was housed in a 3-storied building at 1 Bhubon Sarkar Lane. I was eventually awarded a gold medal at Gitobitan. I graduated in 1958, and in the same year, my son Ronjon was born. 2 months later, Muriel gave birth to a beautiful daughter. They named her Shiuli. In 1960, my husband took up a job with Kuljan Corporation in Barauni, Bihar. Though I lived mainly in Calcutta with my son, I did travel often enough with him to my husband's place of work. Photographs of Sri Aurobindo and you on my dressing table would fill up the emptiness of my life during that period. I wondered if I would ever see you again, and Pondicherry. But who would take me there? As a conservative Hindu wife and mother, I could not travel alone. Yet when you had said au revoir, could it have been just a casual comment? These thoughts haunted me deeply. Now I know that you were aware of what was going on. There was someone else who guessed quietly. My husband. Perhaps guided by Providence, he took me one day to meet someone at the house of Shadhan Datto, his new boss. This gentleman was Pruthut Kumar Bhattacharjee, often referred to by his initials PKB. My husband had already offered himself to this engineering legend, but from a distance. Now he brought me within the ambit of that offering. There at Shadhunda's dining table, I realized how deeply connected I was. I was grateful to my husband for introducing me to Daddy. He was the one who rescued me from listlessness and despair by bringing me into the epicenter of the whirlwind of your work. My enthusiasm about the Pondicherry ashram touched Daddy that evening. In his usual mild manner, he welcomed me to your world. You were his God. Reminiscences of Barauni bring back memories of Shamul, Protheen's colleague and lieutenant. I could not have had a greater friend than him. Daddy was also a consultant to Bihar State Electricity Board and would come to visit. The light I had seen emanating from you was rekindled again. Daddy was my second father, my own father having passed away the very year I met him. He helped me forget my sorrow at the death of my father. He was the one who brought meaning back to my marriage. Whenever Daddy came from Pondicherry to Calcutta, he would stay at the Great Eastern Hotel. I knew nothing of Lakshmi's house till he told me how Lakshmi Devi Loyalka had offered the house to you. You had asked Daddy whether he could stay here whenever he was in Calcutta instead of at the hotel. The day I first came to meet him there, I never even dreamt that this was to become the place of my work, my love for you. You had named it your home of grace. Meanwhile, I had admitted Ranjan into St. Xavier's School despite everyone's objections because I had great faith in English medium education. It took a lot of effort to mold Ranjan in the way I wanted. When he reached class 6, I enrolled at the Government College of Art to learn painting and at the Wafukai Academy to study Ikebana. I don't know if I was unconsciously preparing myself for your work. I had started making footstool covers for you as per Daddy's advice. I began to visit Sri Aurobindo Path Mandir in College Street. I came to know more about your work from Shobha Dotto at Brindabon Pal Lane, which was virtually next door. Meanwhile, Lakshmi's house opened its doors with a Griho Prabesh on Mahasaraswati Pujo in 1968, and Shakti Center started with Asha, Mayadi and Rekhadi.
Sapere, ne, true, Dio. Qu'est-ce que vous savez ici?
I was an occasional visitor in those early days, and slowly I got to know and respect Orun Kaka. You had given this exceptional man from the Tagore family the responsibility of running Lakshmi's house. When, in 1972, he started a nursery school there with only 4 students, you named it Orun Nursery. I went to Pondicherry again with my family. Daddy's inspiration had drawn my entire family towards you. A wave unsettled the placid waters of my comfortable family life. Though a wife and daughter in conservative Hindu family settings, I began to feel the unusual urge to involve myself beyond my world and join yours. I was torn between my family and you, and trying to find a balance. We flocked together at Daddy's house in Pondicherry. To listen to him was to listen to you. His commands were yours.
মা বলেছেন পৃথিবীতে অতিমানব শক্তি আলো চেতনা অবারিত ধারায় নেমেছে নিঃসন্দেহ আমরা চাই এটা সত্য হোক হয়তো প্রার্থনা করি এটা পূর্ণ হোক কিন্তু কি সম্পূর্ণ গ্রহণ করতে পেরেছি এটা ঘটেছে
Preparations for Sri Aurobindo's centenary were in the air. You wanted to take the message of Sri Aurobindo to the youth of India for the benefit of the nation. You founded Sri Aurobindo's Action and made Daddy its chairman. I accompanied him on trips to far-flung villages where our meetings began with Pankaj Mollik's rendering of Bhuvaneshwaro He. Daddy would then speak to the village folk about Sri Aurobindo, usually in the vernacular. I listened intently, and slowly my heart, not just my mind, was listening.
সত্য সংকল্প কর আর অল্পাতি
My life changed radically in the years ahead after a number of unique experiences. I recorded in my diary how I yearned for your blessings on my birthday in February 1971. On the 21st of the same month, your birthday, I established a meditation center at Ipshita, my house in Muthamgram. Mama Babu supported my endeavor. We assembled on the third Sunday of every month, and Shunilda's music transported us into another level of consciousness. In April that year, I left Ranjan behind in Calcutta and made my way to Pondicherry to put up at Jamshedpur House. The sea breeze there would unsettle everything on the first floor room when the doors and windows were kept open. So I closed them shut and went for your darshan. I saw you and prayed silently. When I returned to my first floor room at Jamshedpur House, I found a flower on my bed. Integral progress. How did the flower come here? Who had come here? I tried to find out, but could get no plausible answer and realized that it was you who had sent me the flower. It was your gift in answer to my prayers. The 5 pale pink petals with a red center represented constant progress in matter, result of an ardent aspiration. I was overwhelmed. I had been a flower that Daddy had picked up along his path and had dedicated me to your feet. You caressed me so much when I came to see you. Ever since, I have always come for April Darshan. I had changed, irrevocably so. Sri Aurobindo's centenary had been a key milestone. With Mama Babu's help, I had organized the public celebrations on a grand scale. The prayer centers functioned as usual. Apart from Ipshita, prayer meetings at the first floor sitting room of our Bhupen Bosch Avenue residence were organized on the first Sunday of every month. Then there was the center at Shebayun Nursing Home, run by Dr. Arun Ghosh and Sholiladi. Shukumar Dotto started Boshudhara, the organ of the West Bengal chapter of Sri Aurobindo's Action. With his premature death, the responsibility came upon Sholiladi and me. Every time Daddy came to Lakshmi's house, I would rush from the other end of the town to serve him. My relationship with Orun Kaka and Rani Di became deeper. Meanwhile, you gave Sri Aurobindo's relics to Sri Aurobindo Bhavan in January 1973 on condition that he be received in his hometown with state honours. My alpuna covered the width of the entire first floor of Sri Aurobindo Bhavan. Even Ipshita was included in the itinerary. I had wanted to visit you in Pondicherry on my birthday that year, but I could not. Was that why you sent Sri Aurobindo himself to visit me? Once again, I went to Pondicherry for April Darshan. You appeared at the terrace at 6:15 in the evening. I looked at you and muttered to myself again and again, Victoire à la douce mère. I returned with your blessings and with a pair of your slippers that you gave me for Ipshita through Nirod Borun, Sri Aurobindo's attendant for many years. My life continued in a haze, and I began to see myself in a completely new light. I hoped that the beauty you had manifested in and through me would not create unwanted desire within others. I wanted them to see your image in my face and feel tranquil. I realized I had to be one with you. I had to be you. That year, I went for August Darshan, accompanied by my family and Gaur and Jamai Babu. I did not know that would be the last time, Mother, that I would see you physically. We had joined the throng of thousands of people and stood below your terrace. In that stillness of expectancy, Gaur started calling out to you, and you appeared almost instantly thereafter. Gaur felt you had come responding to his call, which your divinity had swooped down just to gather him in its embrace. This is how you paved my path towards you. The devastating news hit us on 18th November, when we were preparing for prayers at Ipshita. We learned that you had left your mortal body. was overcome with grief. The ground had disappeared from under our feet, We rushed to Pondicherry and reached the ashram, only to see your mortal remains being brought to the samadhi. And I remembered your words. If I ever leave my body, my consciousness will remain with you. You are present, as you always were, within me. It is this belief that continued to move my body and soul. I was here on earth to serve you. My monthly sojourns to Lakshmi's house continued. I was there whenever Daddy came. Asha, Mayadi and Rekhadi were busy with Shukti Center. Bharatidi was involved with the nursery school started in Orun Kaka's name. The library and the science laboratory for college students were functioning well. But in 1974, Orun Kaka was diagnosed with cancer and admitted to the PG hospital. Members of his family came from Pondicherry to look after him. Finally, when the doctors gave up hope, they took him away to Pondicherry for the last time. He passed away a couple of weeks later. Work at Lakshmi's house came to an abrupt standstill. Suddenly, everyone seemed to be lacking in direction. I saw that Daddy was particularly agitated about the future of Lakshmi's house, especially as to who would take the responsibility to run it. Meanwhile, the grass had grown tall and the garden overrun by weeds. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to step forward and tell Daddy that I could help. Daddy turned his meditative eyes towards me. I took help from Kironda of Birati Ashram to clear the weeds and began planting new trees. Orun Kaka's wife, Minkudi, had taught me to make incense sticks from natural ingredients with no additives or perfume. We began making this incense in Lakshmi's house and Daddy named it Ahuti. I noticed that there was always a stream of visitors when Daddy was in town. But when he left, Lakshmi's house wore a deserted look. I wondered how it would be possible to do your work in such an isolated corner. We then hit upon the idea of an annual exhibition that would showcase, among other things, authentic rosewood furniture and utensils made of thick-gauge stainless steel that were made in the ashram, an absolute rarity in Calcutta. I asked Daddy's friends and admirers, including Biti and Amol, who had been initiated on this path at Ipshita, to take a week's vacation in early January and help out. It added life to a place that was hardly frequented in those days and became an annual feature. With encouragement from Charuda of Jamshedpur, I opened the sales counter beside the main gate, first with Onup and later Pratap. Inspired by the Brotachari movement, I also created a unit with local youngsters and named it Debshangho. Daddy became the beloved Dadu of all the children, none of whom were ever deprived of his love and affection. The peacock in our garden would try to match his voice when the children cried out, "Victoire à la douce mère," as though joining in your salutation.
Victoire à la douce mère.
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 Victory to our sweet mother.
Victory to our sweet mother.
Victory to our sweet mother.
On his deathbed, Arun Kaka had founded the Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture, with Daddy as the chairman, to continue the work in Lakshmi's house. Uday Shankar approached Daddy to teach a new concept that he called body and mind, and Daddy readily agreed. Daddy remembered that you had called Lakshmi's house your house in Calcutta, that it will be the home of grace. So, for those Calcuttans who yearned but could not make it to Pondicherry, he wanted to build a haven here where they could breathe the same atmosphere, live the same inner experience. That is why, when a proposal to sell Lakshmi's house to fund Matri Mondir at Auroville was mooted in certain quarters, he, along with Shadhunda, fought it tooth and nail. In these precarious circumstances, I was inducted into the working committee of Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture as Assistant Secretary. Shamol had meanwhile been appointed treasurer in place of Arun Kaka. You had given your slippers to Lakshmi House right at inception. Now, to build a solid foundation for your ashram in Calcutta, Daddy brought Sri Aurobindo's relics. The holy relics were installed on 24th June 1977, coincidentally Rotin's birthday, by the Honourable Chief Justice of Calcutta High Court. Overnight, the house was transformed. God had concretely taken abode here and has presided ever since. Meanwhile, my mother died after a long illness. with construction for the metro railway having further compounded the chaos on Calcutta's streets. The daily commute from my Shambhajar home had become impractical, and I moved to take up residence here. Daddy and Shadonda worked tirelessly in those difficult times to support us and keep us going. Finally, I had truly become an ashramite and exclusively your servitor. Meanwhile, your centenary arrived and I conceived of a music album dedicated to you. A large part of the credit for the HMV disc, called The Mother, must go to Biman Ghosh. Under the direction of eminent Sanskrit scholar Sri Govinda Gopal Mukhopadhyay, whom I respected as my elder brother, many famous and talented singers learned songs of Dilip Kumar Rai and Nishikanto, and the album created quite a stir in Calcutta. With the blessings of Nolini Kanto Gupta, your secretary, I used his translations of Sri Aurobindo's immortal epic Shabitri to make a script for a Bengali dance drama. Once again, brilliant singers, musicians, and elocutionists supported the effort. Our Munni, Olokananda Rai, performed the role of Shabitri at the show at Robindra Shodon. These endeavors would go a long way in building a solid cultural agenda for Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture. The prayer meetings at my Shambhajar home and at Modhumgram and the publication of Boshudhara continued, helped considerably by the arrival of a printing press at Lakshmi's house. Meanwhile, under Daddy's guidance, the constitution of Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture was revisited and penned by Orunadi's husband, Sri Shaurindranath Dotto. Lakshmi's house now became my address for the rest of my life. Daddy, my husband, Shamul, and many others were together in a big household of which you, Mother, were the head. It still runs that way. I was lucky that Shamul had taken up residence here even before I did. Madhuri Di, the talented wife of Govinda Gopal Babu, started teaching the songs of Dilip Kumar Rai and Nishikanto at Shakti Center. A medical unit was also started in 1979 with doctors like Dr. Shankarlal Sarkar. Dr. Arun Ghosh and Sholila Di guided and supported us throughout in this endeavor.
39 বাকি ছিল 1 কেজি কমেছে 1 কেজি কমেছে
A weaving unit was set up here with Priyodi, where the school now stands, to make homespun towels for ashramites at Pondicherry. The demand to create a high school in the green environment of Lakshmi's house began to pour in from the parents of the nursery children. By 1981, we had decided to embark on the journey. I had to take a postgraduate degree and a teacher's training qualification to equip myself for the job. The voices of many children filled the environment here. And in 1984, the school came to be known as the Future Foundation School. But my life, secure under the shade of Daddy's affection and blessings, was destined to encounter a new challenge. I had gone to Pondicherry for the November darshan. He had contracted a strange ailment a few years ago, and his red blood corpuscles would multiply manifold. 2 days before the darshan, he passed away. My daddy was a towering figure in the fraternity of Indian engineers who were building the physical edifice of independent India. You had made him a lion in your heart. A man of few words, the depth of his wisdom was hard to fathom, and his fragile frame belied the stature of his personality. His meditative eyes enthralled me. When I try to listen carefully, I can still hear him speak. With him, I lost my second father, but he had given meaning to my life, and I would henceforth only live for you. The memories of Daddy's home in Pondicherry's council house are still vivid. We often visited Pondicherry during the Durga Puja holidays. Dr. Orun Ghosh and Sholiladi had built Orulila, and we would now stay there. It was always a homecoming of sorts, where Gargidi and Kanta would preside. I had been his instrument, and he now told me to take full charge of Lakshmi's house. I had gone with him to Pondicherry, but I came back alone with his ashes. Dumon Bhai, another trustee, gave me your blessings and photograph and told me I was returning with you. A new chapter of my life had begun. Times they were a-changing. Orunadi and Shantidi left for their heavenly abode. Mayadi, Rekhadi, Sholiladi, Ranidi gradually left for Pondicherry to become permanent ashramites there. Bharutidi was the founder headmistress of Orun Nursery, but she too now started spending a lot of her time in the United States. Shamul was a constant companion in all my endeavors. But I could not have coped if Mr. D.P. Chatterjee, erstwhile chief engineer in the state's irrigation department, had not joined hands with me in building the systems and structure of the Future Foundation School. After Daddy, Duman Bhai became the chairman of Sri Aurobindo Institute of Culture. Our exchange of letters was a daily affair. I would recount the day's experiences in my letter to him, asking for his advice, which arrived with due regularity. Duman Bhai had never left Pondicherry, but he did break this resolve when he came to inaugurate our hall. Sri Aurobindo had called him Duman, the luminous one, and so we called this hall the Hall of Light. His guidance and unconditional support made it possible for me to run Lakshmi's house. We also revisited the format of our annual celebrations, which we had started calling Aspiration several times. The city did not have too many fairs in those days, and we decided to start one with artisans and craftsmen from rural areas bringing their special produce.
সোনার ভমরা হরিণ উড়ি যে উড়িয়ে পালায় কিছু দূরে গিয়ে রামচন্দ্র মারিচে বাঁধিল মায়া মারি চিৎকার করে ডাকিতে লাগিল বলে রাক্ষসের হাতে প্রাণ যায় প্রাণের ভাই লক্ষণ এ বিপদে দেখা দিয়ে রাখো গো জীবন
এ তো আমাকেই গার্হস্থ্য ধর্ম শেখাতে বসলো মহারাজ আমি কি আপনাকে কিছু শেখাতে পারি তা সেটা যদি জানোই তাহলে ধ্যান তারা না করে কি বলবার আছে ঝটপট বলে বলছি আগে মহারাজ এরা দুজন আপনার বাগানে আমার বাগানে গতকাল সকালে
For some time, we also added a mini book fair with wisdom literature and children's storybooks. I had to visit one government office after another in securing recognition of Lakshmi's house as a charitable institution and later government permission for the school. And I cannot forget Shadunda's tremendous contribution in all this. The name of Sri Aurobindo would invoke instant respect. The Chief Secretary, ministers, and even the Chief Minister and several governors accepted our invitation to visit Lakshmi's house and were happy with what they saw.
May we fight successfully the great battle of the future that is to be born against the past that seeks to endure so that the new kings may manifest and we be ready to receive them.
And I had no program to be here on the 6th. I was going away on the 5th.
Yes.
And then suddenly, you rang Joya. I don't know how you were going to this. And I said, certainly it would be my great pleasure Are these products of the ashram?
No, these are the Bengals. These paintings.
So this is the only center of the actual ashram. Here.
The ground spices.
I invited many talented people to our campus, and the school children welcomed them with joy and warmth. They performed playlets based on your stories, your life and your work, and that of Sri Aurobindo. The Hall of Light, the open-air theatre, and the grounds in front are witness to these events. Bimanda and later Shondhadi helped me in this effort. And my dear sister Shonju or Sanjukta Panigrahi came here to give workshops regularly for years together. To convey Sri Aurobindo's message and yours, I also conceived of shows like Bande Mataram, and Shonju danced at Robindra Shodon to the tunes of the national song. It was part of my dream to create a cultural atmosphere in the school beyond sheer academics. In this endeavor, I tried to assimilate the thoughts and message of Tagore as well, and many would comment on the mini Shantiniketan and mini Pondicherry in which they found themselves. I was extremely busy with running the school and was very lucky to get extremely dedicated teachers, and with both students and teachers, I forged a very close bond.
সেই যে ছোট্ট মোরগ, এখানে ছোট্ট মোরগ বলতে কিন্তু কোনো ছোট বাচ্চার সঙ্গে তুলনা করা হয়নি।
Flowers should not go out of these lines.
We had got the school affiliated to the Council for Indian School Certificate Examinations, a very friendly, proactive and sympathetic school board. We had to start now to make a proper structure for the school, and Shamol gave up his job and concentrated exclusively on that. I had flowers blooming in the gardens, and in class I would explain the significance of the names that you had given for each of them. I told children about beauty in ideas, in work, in minds. All that we recognize as beauty is an expression of that inner happiness. You were an artist of the Impressionist school at the turn of the last century in France, and had brought your artistic genius to bear on the ashram and Auroville. Thinking of all that, the idea of an art gallery at Lakshmi's house was born. I had no experience, but the contribution of artists like Poritoshda, Ramanandoda, Joginda, Robinda, Niranjan and Shukti was invaluable. With Shukti, I had developed a close bond since our days together at Government Art College. Their ideas and their advice helped me to establish Gallery La Mer as a tribute to your artistic and aesthetic genius. Calcutta was celebrating its tercentenary. The history of the city was intimately connected with a vital part of Sri Aurobindo's life. I felt the city needed to connect again with him, who was one of its most glorious sons. I was back again with the zeal of an activist of Sri Aurobindo's action. I started identifying the sites where he had lived and worked. For months on end, I poured through the city's records and then walked through tiny lanes and by-lanes to identify these houses.
এই পাশে এইটুকু ছাদটা দেখা যাচ্ছে আমরা শ্রী অরবিন্দ ইনস্টিটিউট অফ কালচার এবং শ্রী অরবিন্দ কলকাতা মেমোরিয়াল কমিটির পক্ষ থেকে কলকাতা শহরে যেসব বাড়ি শ্রী অরবিন্দের উপস্থিতিতে বন্য হয়েছিল সেই সব বাড়ির তালিকা অনুসারে
With the guidance of Professor Nishit Ranjan Roy, a Sri Aurobindo and Calcutta Memorial Committee was formed in partnership with the Calcutta Municipal Corporation. Commemorative marble plaques were installed at these sites.
Shastra Shamalang Mataram Vande Mataram Vande Mataram Vande Mataram Sufana Malaya Jashitala Shastra Shamalang Mataram Vande Mataram Vande Sufana Malaya Jashitala Shastra Shamalang
The pedestrian on the city's roads would once again see the name of Sri Aurobindo all around him. A pilgrim's route had been charted out.
Shastra Shamalang Mataram Vande Mataram Vande Mataram
From the Joyadi of Lakshmi's house, I had become Calcutta's Joyadi.
যেন এখানে এসেও বিশ্বাস হচ্ছে না যে বহুদিন আগেকার স্মৃতি জড়িত এই প্রাসাদের মধ্যে আজকে আমরা আসতে পেরেছি শ্রী অরবিন্দের জন্মদিনে, যেখানে একবারে শ্রী অরবিন্দ একটানা অনেক দিন বসবাস করেছেন এবং বহু স্মৃতি এই বাড়ির সঙ্গে জড়িত।
It was a magical time. Suddenly, one day, I made the acquaintance of Judge Pyarilal Dotto. He was researching old records at the Alipur Judges' Court. One day, he spied an old trunk lying in a corner. He had it opened, and lo and behold, it contained all the documents of the Alipur bomb case in which Sri Aurobindo had been incarcerated. With a lot of effort and with help from plenty of people, it was possible to convert the courtroom where the trial had been held to a memorial.
My appeal to you is this, that long after this controversy is hushed in silence, long after this turmoil, this agitation ceases, long after he is dead, he will be known as the poet of patriotism, as the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of the land. Long after he is dead and gone, his words will be echoed and re-echoed not only in India, I say that the man in his position is simply standing in the heart of the soul.
I had worked with Mama Babu on Sri Aurobindo's birth centenary. We teamed up again in this work a quarter century later. With the help of facsimiles I had now collected, I organized an exhibition. Sri Ongshu Banerjee researched through the available copies of Jugantor. I wanted them compiled in a book for posterity. Professor Amulendu De also took interest.
Sri Aurobindo was born in Calcutta on 15th August 1872.
Slightly later, I set up, with the help from Sri Amit Shorkar, a Sonne Lumiere show on the eve of the 125th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo. I called it Porichoy.
He was the third child, with brothers Binoy Bhushan and Monomohan, elder to him, and Sarojini, his sister, younger than him. Auro was admitted at the age of 5 to Loreto Convent, Darjeeling. After 2 years, the three brothers were taken by their parents to Manchester. In 1884, Auro left for London and took admission to St. Paul's. In October 1890, Sri Aurobindo joined King's College, Cambridge. Because of his growing interest in the political and social conditions of India, he declined to appear for the writing test of the ICS. He obtained, on the other hand, a high place in the first class of classical tripos at the end of the second year of his residence in Cambridge. He took up a job in the service of the Gaikwad of Baroda and returned to India in February 1893. Till now, Aurobindo had a completely Occidental education. Now he learned Sanskrit, several modern Indian languages, and assimilated the spirit of Indian civilization in all its aspects. He spent 13 years in Baroda in the administrative and educational services of the state. Sri Aurobindo got married in 1901 to Mrilalini, daughter of Bhupal Bose. In a letter to his wife in August 1905, he wrote, "Others look upon their country as a mass of matter, a number of fields, plains, forests, mountains and rivers, and nothing more." Sri Aurobindo arrived in Pondicherry on 4th April 1910. He spent the next 4 years in various houses in Pondicherry with his associates in intense economic hardship. While he was staying at the guest house, on March 29, 1914, the mother met him for the first time. On the next day she wrote, "It matters little that there are thousands of beings plunged in the densest ignorance. He whom we saw yesterday is on earth. His presence is enough to prove that a day will come when darkness shall be transformed into light." To Japan, and finally came back to Pondicherry in 1920. It is then that the ashram was unofficially founded. The descent of the open mind happened on 24th November 1926.
A clay statue of Sri Aurobindo had already come to Lakshmi House from the residence of Bimal Chakraborty. It had been worshipped publicly in his lifetime. To this was added your statue, sculpted by Nitai Pal and donated by Debojyoti Chondo. This statue was installed in the meditation room in the presence of Uma Siddhanto and Munindra Rajbongshi. It was September 1998. One day, Mama Babu detected blood on my gums and quietly took me to the doctor. Before I knew, I was in hospital, and I learned that I had contracted a form of blood cancer. For a short while, I was devastated. Then you came to me, Mother, and extended your hand. I knew you were calling me towards you. My mind ceased to be sorrowful. I was very close to Dadabhai, and with time, our ties grew even stronger. He lived in England and I here, but he would make it a point to come for my birthday. Ranjan consulted him and Shivli. They advised Ranjan to get me treated at Tata Memorial Hospital in Bombay. Much as he loved them so dearly, Dadabhai left Muriel and Shivli and has been here ever since I went to Bombay. My family had grown. It has never diminished. Shivli sent me a lot of herbal medication from a renowned specialist in London. Ranjan has been not just my son, but also my best friend. And I have impressed upon him once again that there is no time for grief or sorrow. As long as he was growing up, I concentrated exclusively on my role as his mother. My greatest gift to him has been to introduce him to you. If and when I die, he will not lose his mother. During my treatment, I have not paused, even for a day, my work for Lakshmi's house. I knew I must travel towards you in the midst of my work, so I dismissed my own application for leave. All my life, I wanted to be your instrument, to be yours in life and in afterlife. Lead me, sweet mother, wherever you wish. I want to be yours, completely, unreservedly. Victoire à la douce. Mais...